So now I'm going to introduce Libby Murphy, and Libby is the Chief Operating Officer at AV. And it's a role that she's only been in for 6 months, and prior to that Libby was at VicPol for 33 years, where she left as Assistant Commissioner. But today she's going to lead a conversation about what's worked across the sector in terms of creating respectful and inclusive environments for women, with people from 4 different agencies, so 4 different experiences. So over to you, Libby.
Quite clearly I'm a little bit shorter than Suzanne. Laura, was that you who put Elizabeth? I'm not sure who put that, but only my mum calls me that, so please call me Libby when you chat to me. So I'm very grateful to be here today, and first off I'd like to acknowledge traditional owners of the lands on which we meet, from the waters to the trees. For me, I think, if we look out and actually understand the female culture that embeds our Indigenous history, I think that will teach us a lot of lessons. So please acknowledge that. First off, I would like to introduce the panel. So we have a diverse group of representatives who will talk through and introduce themselves, and then talk about how they've championed change, and we'll go through a number of questions. So first off, I'd like to introduce Kelly Rash, who is the Acting Deputy Chief Fire Officer of DELP, Sam Dwyer, who is here, and she's the Female Leadership Network Coordinator and Volunteer of the Hampton Lifesaving Club, Inspector Di Thompson, who is your headquarters Horsham? Di? Yep, from VicPol, and Ben Cash from CFA, who is the Volunteer Sustainability Team Leader. What I'll first off do is get people to introduce themselves, give you a bit of their background in relation to their agencies, and then each will talk for a couple of minutes in relation to the programs that they would like to talk about today, and we'll go through a number of questions that I'm hoping will empower you and show you the opportunities that you each and everyone have in your organisations to make change. So Kelly, I might start with you, please. If you could just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I was the Acting Deputy Chief Fire Officer for Gippsland, but thankfully we have somebody in there now. So my normal role is Regional Manager Fire and Emergency Preparedness for Gippsland. I've been with the organisation for about 35 years now, and I'm in a really fortunate spot to be able to help champion some of this change.
Thank you, and welcome.
Thank you.
Ben.
Hi, I'm Ben Cash. I'm the Regional Basso for CFA out of the South East region. So one of my core responsibilities is the lead of the Women's Network for the South East region. So one of the initiatives that I'm up here to talk about today is our Women's Challenge Camp that we run each year. It's a fantastic experience where we gather women from across the whole region, whether that be from District 8, so Keysborough and surrounds, all the way out to Mallacoota and right out to the eastern point of Victoria. So we bring around 50 women together. We take them through a number of leadership workshops. We have a bit of fun along the way. We've got the climbing walls, the high ropes course, and we also have a great panel discussion where we bring in industry leaders to have a pretty open and frank conversation around women in CFA in particular, but emergency services in general. So we've had the likes of, and when I look around the room, we've been lucky enough to have Deputy Commissioner Michelle Young, who's in the room today. I see that EMV Commissioner Andrew Chris has just snuck in, who joined us last year as well.
Put your hand up,
yeah,
Andrew.
You've been
Come
spotted.
on.
You've been spotted. So we've been lucky enough to have that sort of calibre of leadership attend this camp and actually hear from the women down at the ground level as to what challenges they're facing, because these are women who are often either 1 or 2 in their brigade, and they're fighting against some of those traditional challenges that they've found in the brigade. So we try to offer that mentorship, that place to network, and hopefully lead to a little bit of change throughout the industry.
Thank you, Ben. And I might pop back, I think, Kel, did you want to talk about your program?
I do.
Thank you.
The initiative, I guess, that I'd like to talk to you about today is what we're doing in Gippsland. It's called the Equity and Equality Working Group. And I also just want to qualify, I do work for the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, which I'm going to say DELP, right? But that's part of Forest Fire Management Victoria. So that's made up of DELP, Parks Victoria, Melbourne Water and Vic Forest. And as a collective, we respond to emergencies together. We do our planned burning program together. We work together in recovery. So that just sort of sets the scene, I guess, a little bit for what FFM Vic is. So the Equity and Equality Working Group in Gippsland started after the 2018-19 fire season. It was actually quite a big season, particularly for Port Phillip region and Gippsland, but because 1920 started so early and kept going for so long, it's almost like that's a bit of a forgotten event. But it just started off with a couple of very passionate young women who are operational, and I refer to, I guess, the clip that we just saw before. A lot of the women are pigeonholed to do the administrative type tasks. But these two ladies in particular had an operational background, and they just spoke to our project firefight, a couple of our project firefighters around how their season went, what went well and what they thought we could change and improve on. Our project firefighters are our seasonal firefighters. We put about 600 of those on a year across the state, so they're a massive workforce, and they're really, we invest a lot in their training and safety and uniform and all that sort of stuff because they are so important for us to be able to deal with emergencies. Anyway, I digress. The two young women at the start, they had a conversation with the project firefighters, word of mouth got around. Next thing I know, we've got a formal event held in Hayfield where it was facilitated and all those sorts of things. And out of that, we looked at just simply at what needs improving and what worked well that we need to keep. And out of that, and I am going to read off my notes if you don't mind because I don't want to miss the themes that come out. The first one was around buddying and mentoring, teamed up at work centre level, because first year in the organisation they've got a supervisor. That relationship might not work, they might not be comfortable talking to them, so we're trying to team people up with people that they are comfortable talking to. Returning from extended leave and what as an organisation we could do to help in that, because they've obviously missed a few seasons of firefighting or emergency response. Training and capability, and in particular career development, so a bit of longevity in their career. Values and behaviours, and that is massive in our organisation. But this was really particular about our young project firefighters. The targets, so the Chief Fire Officer set some targets back in 2015 associated with the Women in Fire Leadership Program. So we talked about them, and then communications and engagement. That group then went away. We needed to get people on board to become part of a working group, which we did. We also realised that these issues aren't just about women, it affects men as well. So we needed to have a working group that was both men and women so that we can help men and women. Obviously, at the moment, in the last, when the stats were first done back in 2015, I think it was, Chris, you got a hold of them, and, they're stacked up against the women big time, but we can't make change on our own.
There'll be a but, I'm sure.
We can't do it on our own. We need everybody involved in this. We were really keen. We didn't want to tap people on the shoulder and make this part of make them have to come and sit on this working group. We wanted it to be voluntary and something that they were passionate about so that could help drive the program, I guess, of the working group.
Thank you, and I'm sure we'll explore with some of our questions a few more of the issues that we'll go into detail in relation to the biases and how we challenge them. But Sam, I'd like to hear from you about your program.
Thanks, Libby. So, hi everyone. I'm the Female Leadership Network Coordinator as a volunteer for Lifesaving Victoria. I'm a lifesaving volunteer, but I know a number of you would also know me from working with Level 2 to Level 3 Incident Management Team Development over the last 16 years or so. I'm really privileged today to talk about the progression of 6 Hazaras refugee women from Afghanistan who came out here and over a very short period of 3 years, including COVID, managed to become qualified lifesavers. And I just want to do a heartfelt thanks to Sahar, who's sitting over here. Sahar has led me by the hand and taught me so many things over the last 10 days. So thank you, Sahar.
Well done, Sahar.
So I guess as a bit of context, 40% of drownings can be attributable to the cold community. They're 5 times more likely to drown from swimming, and so Lifesaving Victoria over 10 years ago started a called sort of water safety education and learn to swim program. And I know Dave Holland is here, who's the GM of Inclusion and Diversity. Where are you, Dave?
Welcome, Dave.
So Dave also requires a lot of congratulations because he's really supported and got this off the ground. So as a part of that water safety awareness and Learn to Swim, there's also an underlying theme of assimilation into the community and inclusion, and some of the things that they did do and some of the things we found out along the way today we'll discuss a little bit further down the track. But think about 2018, Sahar and her girlfriends land in Australia. They don't speak English. They're non-swimmers, and I think we saw Sahar on the video this morning. But they also haven't seen a pool or a beach ever. They're from a landlocked country. The Hazaras are the most persecuted minority on the planet and have been for hundreds and hundreds of years. And when they sought refuge in Pakistan, it was pretty much the same. So come out to Australia, go to language school, and fortunately, I think as part of the program, we had one of the first males from Afghanistan who became a lifesaver, and he became a mentor and a real promoter and a seller of the program. So Ramsey was obviously pretty good because he got the girls, rather than just doing Learn to Swim in 25 metres, took them on an excursion to the beach and enrolled them and made them aspire to doing their surf rescue certificate. So Sahar tells some hilarious stories about, so you can imagine when you don't know how to swim how frightening it is, and if you haven't seen bodies of water before, but also imagine wearing all of your clothes, because custom is to wear all the clothes. And Sahar was telling me, you know, quite a few times we nearly drowned because our scarves were going out the back, and so, and that was obviously a big hurdle. So we see down the track they get their SRC, these 6 girls. They then move on and get their bronze medallion. They are patrolling at Bond Beach Lifesaving Club. Sahar and one of her friends now have their IRB crew, and they're both champing at the bit to do their IRB driver a little bit later this year.
Fabulous. So we're very much looking forward to that.
But wait, there's more.
There's more. Oh,
So,
sorry.
COVID posed a bit of a problem, and also Bond Beach was redoing their lifesaving club, so there wasn't a club. So to keep themselves entertained, the girls learned a fairly complicated sport called 5-person rescue and resuscitation. And they were all ready to go to the state championships in 2020, and COVID didn't help that much. So in 2021, Sahar and 4 of her girlfriends got the silver medal at the state championships in 5-person RMX.
That certainly was more. Thank you, Sam. Congratulations on the silver medal. Thank you, and I'm sure people in the room will be fascinated about how you dealt with the biases and challenges, which we'll probably come to in our next question. But I will next introduce Di Thompson, an inspector from Victoria Police, who will talk to you about the Victoria Police program in her area.
Thanks, Libby. Hi everyone, I'm Di Thompson. I'm an inspector up in Horsham, which is in the Wimmera. It's way west, the wild, wild west, really. I've been in Victoria Police for 36 years. So I graduated back in the 80s, and it's a real privilege when some people say to me, I don't know why we need women in policing local committees. I've never felt the need for that, and I say to myself, wow, if only you'd been around in the 80s when the squad mates of mine left employment because they became mothers, and there was no fair work or flexible agreements, there was no part-time. And
there's lots of nodding heads in the room,
yeah,
Di.
and a lot of those people would have been fantastic in our industry and across other industries, but they just didn't have those opportunities. So I always think that's fantastic when people say that. The initiative that I'm going to talk about is the Women in Policing Local Committees, which were established across all areas of Victoria Police in response to the Verioc report as a safe space for women employees to raise relevant workplace issues and concerns. There's over 30 of these active committees, and they all look differently because Victoria Police is a really diverse organisation insofar as places to work and things to do. So those committees will be working on different things because the women in Bright will have perhaps different needs than the women in Warrnambool. So we make sure that they're individualised to the needs of the women in those places. The key purpose of the Women in Policing local committees are to ensure a respectful, equitable and diverse workforce, to provide information, advice and support to women and matters that relate to women, to provide consultation and mentoring, to add those touches that are really relevant to women, some of the examples being lactation rooms, wellbeing rooms, caregiver facilities that have emerged over the last decade, and to establish, most importantly, networking opportunities, because with women, it generally boils down to confidence. And especially if you've left your organisation and become a mother, when you come back 12 months later, there's a lot of vulnerability in that space. And so our project is twofold. That's the Women in Policing Local Committee, and they're oversighted by the Women in Policing Advisory Group. Now, they're a high-level group that has been designed to have visibility and a presence at executive command level, because we all know that if we want change in our organisations, it has to come from the bottom up and the top down. We have to have all of those intersection pieces meeting. They advise on professional developments, once again, as they relate to women, because it looks different and it feels different for women. They influence and inform our Equal, Safe and Strong, which is our Victoria Police's gender equity strategy, and they informed the Listen and Learn for the Chief Commissioner, Shane Patton, who was very interested to learn about the experiences of women in the organisation. Thanks, Libby.
Thanks, Di. So I'm going to test some of the thinking of the panel, or at least try and explore some of the components of each of their programs or initiatives, just to try and test what some of the challenges and biases were. So I might open up with a first question and go to a couple of you to answer that. So the first question is, are you able to identify the barriers or exclusions in relation to your program, and tell me who was involved in the development of the program and why was it necessary to have those particular people on board to assist you to drive the change that was needed? And I might, if I can, I might turn to you first, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So from our point of view, and I'll focus in on really who we had to have involved in this, and there was quite a few different stakeholders. Most importantly, though, was all about the volunteers. What did they want to get out of the program? Because without them, the camp doesn't happen. So we had to do a lot of talking. We spoke to a number of different women from different regions to identify key issues that they're facing, because the issues that we have down around French Island or down near Phillip Island is a lot different to the challenges happening down in Mallacoota. So we had to try and find that balance. But what we were able to do is actually find some themes. So we were able to theme up our weekend to be able to tackle some of the greater issues, and that was, how do we become a leader? So one of the issues that we have within CFA is the amount of female leadership that we have in our volunteer ranks. So the Southeast region, if we look at our captains down through our lieutenants, 9% of our leadership positions in those ranks are female.
And I think that would be reflected across most agencies here.
Absolutely. And the sad thing is we're actually leading the way out of all the regions. So 9% is leading the way. Now it's a step forward. So we won't beat ourselves up too badly. We are moving forward. But geez, it's a long, slow process. And again, I think everyone in this room can see that within your organisations. So we're trying to find that way to put the foot down a little, try and find those skills that are missing so that we can try and bring more women up the ranks, so that we can try and bring about a more equal and diverse CFA throughout the region. Because the reality is that how some male leaders think is obviously different to how female leaders think, and we need the lens of both in order to make really good, solid decisions within CFA about what the future looks like. So we're really keen to try and develop that, and as a result of the camp, we actually had one female put their hand up and become a captain, because they had the support, the backing and the mentorship of another female captain close to her. So the camp already is ticking boxes, kicking goals, whatever theme you want to use. And we're actually taking these volunteer firefighters who have been there for 10, 15 years. They've got all these practical skills. They're just missing that final component. And for those who are here this morning, we talked about going for jobs, and it's all about the 2 boxes that you don't tick, even though you tick the other 8 boxes. So we're just trying to find those programs and those skill sets so you can tick the last 2 boxes, and we can get people into that leadership position to bring CFA along on the ride and actually lead from the bottom up. Because if we can start doing it from a volunteerism point of view, hopefully it'll extend throughout the organisation and we can increase the amount of female leaders that we have throughout what was a male industry.
Thanks, Ben. That's really helpful. Sam, your thoughts on biases or who you needed to bring along to make the change that you needed for this program?
Yeah, look, I think if we're not looking at the gender part, if we're looking at the CALD community initially, I think Dave Holland was saying the other day, they've got about 450 target cultural leaders, whether that be the person in charge of the language school, whether it be someone senior in the church or someone who's very important in the community. And I know for this particular program and getting the girls through, Ramsey, who was the Afghan man who was a lifesaver, was instrumental, firstly in terms of selling it. So selling the program in terms of becoming a lifesaver, there's lots of opportunities for skills as a volunteer, but there are also pathways to employment. And obviously, refugees come here, they're often coming here with nothing. Employment is a big priority. So actually showing the communities that this is a pathway. And I think Sahar and one of her friends are now employed in the multicultural department at Lifesaving Victoria. I think 3 of the girls are lifeguards at a pool. And then we had a bit of a joke about this because the amazing image of it's only got 5 of the girls, not 6. And Sahar, I said to Sahar, what happened to the 6? She's always on holidays.
Lucky her.
So, and I think Ramsey was instrumental in terms of that. I was asking Sahar, so, you know, how did you go with the swimming? And she said, oh, one day we all gave up. We're all tangled up in our scarves and we nearly drowned 7 times. And we said, no, we're not doing it anymore. And Ramsey actually proactively went and encouraged the girls to come along. I think one of the other biases, obviously, in terms of their culture, is that they need to have a scarf and be covered. So they did things like hide out a pool and had only female lifeguards, female staff, female instructors. So it actually meant that the girls could, you know, swim in bathers and actually get on top of their swimming. I think one of the other barriers as well is, again, when they graduated with their SRC and you get your patrol uniform and you feel really proud. It can be pretty hot on the beach with all of that. And I think a photo went out in social media and a lady who runs a swimwear company called Ahida in New South Wales saw that they'd put on their patrol uniform over the top of all of their other clothes. And she actually designed and donated the burkini. Wow. So, and I'm not, did we show the photo before of the 5 girls up on the screen?
I've seen it, but did it go up, Laura? I'm not sure. There we go.
There we go. It's
very fetching.
Absolutely. So there we've got the burkini, and that instills a sense of pride too.
Yeah.
And you know, when people see that photo, people are going to, and Dave, I'm stealing your words, but they're going to want to learn to swim like these girls. They're going to want to be lifesavers like these girls. They want to be role models like these girls. And I think Lifesaving Victoria has since bought a number of swimsuits or outfits. So when people's objection is, well, I can't do it because I don't have a swimsuit, they've got something there already. I think that at the Lifesaving Club level, they did things like making sure that other people at the Lifesaving Club were including the girls. I know Dawn got the girls together to keep them entertained with R&R, and they got a medal from it. The barbecue, the sausage sizzle, which is traditional at all Lifesaving Clubs, is halal meat. So everybody has that at the sausage sizzle. But I definitely think targeting those cultural leaders and using someone like Ramsey to keep momentum. And now we've got this group of girls, there's going to be more momentum for girls afterwards.
Thanks, Sam. I think that's really helpful. So probably my thoughts or takeaways from that are actually, if you look at your organisations or the people who you are representing today, put your lens over that in relation to the opportunities for culturally and linguistically diverse communities and the barriers that you are creating within your organisation. I know Tony, my CEO, is here today, and we'd had some very interesting discussions during this week about how we need to challenge ourselves more to actually understand the biases that we bring. So that's a really important thing. So I've just asked you to inwardly look and think about those things for your organisation. I might go to you, Kelly. You know, the biases that existed or who you needed to bring on board to actually assist you with your program.
Yeah, thank you. So the working group, we needed to bring on board everybody from leadership roles, management roles, right down to the the forest fire operations officers, who are the people doing the work on the ground. So we've got a real mixture in that working group, but we also needed to sort out our governance so that we had, I guess, an authorising environment to be able to do stuff once the themes and the teams worked out what it was that we needed to do. So we ended up reporting through to the Gippsland Senior Leadership Team, but we also collaborate and inform our regional safety and wellbeing consultative committee. It was really important to have them on board for us to be able to put anything into effect to make change.
I think that's a really important point, because the governance component is always an integral component of actually being able to achieve something. So if you have people supporting you through the process rather than people, you know, with their ideas, you actually need some people to help you drive it. So again, I challenge the leaders in the room, step up and make ways for these things to work and empower your people to work through and support them in that process. Thank you, that's really helpful, Kelly. So I might go through to the next question, and this is in relation to what the sector can learn from the program success and lessons learnt. And are there elements that you can recommend to other units or brigades or areas or branches within the room or stations? I'm trying to cover all the services. And do you have any recommendations or suggestions on how we can improve the sharing or after action lessons that you've had? So Di, I'll turn to you. Thanks.
I certainly think some of the great achievements are the advocacy for women within whatever organisation that you represent. Certainly the Women in Policing Local Committee, they were able to increase participation and confidence and therefore raise the voices of women. Women in whatever organisation you represent, they can't be what they can't see. So unless you have, in particular, women that are prepared to lean in and take responsibility for change, then everybody will sit back and wait. And that's why it's taking so long in every sector for this to happen. Some of the things that we learned was that not everyone was willing to participate in advancement for gender equality and equity in Victoria Police. Certainly, initially there was a lot of backlash that we had to wade through. That created, you know, secondary issues that were unforeseen at the start, because naturally the most progressive of people in Victoria Police wanted this advancement for the whole organisation, and very disappointingly that wasn't going to be the feel for how it progressed, but very graciously we've moved forward, and the Equal, Safe and Strong strategy was released in January 2020, and 2 months later the pandemic was released on the world. So we have got some catching up to do, because Victoria Police had to roll up their sleeves and get on with organising the business of the pandemic. But what gives me some great comfort from the pandemic was Victoria Police had to bandy together and had to be agile and pivot towards things that we'd never done before. And we got that job done. And I think to myself, we take the same attitude and we take the same aspiration and we level it up against gender equity and equality, but actually don't need 10 years, we might need 5. So it's all about what we can bring to the table. Some of the downsides to balance it up was that a lot of the responsibility then was misplaced down to people in the Women in Policing Local Committees and the YPAG, the Women in Policing Advisory Groups, rather than being where it needed to be, which was at really executive management level and at all levels in Victoria Police, because everybody in whatever organisation you represent has a charter of responsibility. Because this is not an organisation or a sectoral issue, this is actually a worldwide issue. Because women that are the majority of the subject of violence in the world, you know, about 90% of the victims unfortunately are women, this is a global issue. So even if we're the vehicles for our own organisations and our own communities, that will push the safety of women worldwide as we go forward. So I think what's really interesting, and chiming in on your bather example, when you become a commissioned officer, you go to a tailor and they give you a beautiful tunic and it has these beautiful epaulets. And I said to the tailor, oh my God, why are the epaulets so big? You know, I'm like Pat Benatar out of the 80s. And he
That's
said,
not a bad thing to be.
yeah, well, and he said, Di, here's the deal. Every woman that becomes a commissioned officer says the same thing, but they're designed for men. And men have much bigger shoulders than women, and no one's bothered to redesign it. So this is interesting, right? So the conversation in our organisation has always been, have we got the right man for the job? And what we've unpicked is realised that, well, we may or we might not have, but we certainly had the right position description for a man. And we still haven't moved away from that much. But we're on the way. Thanks,
And
Libby.
Thank you, Di. That's really helpful, and I think some really important points, and I'll probably come back to them in closing. But I think that there's a certain, a dichotomy in the fact that we talk about, the women and what we're doing, leading change, and the women in policing committees. But sometimes men have to stand up too, and I know that those in the room are, and I know that many of you are driving the change. But I often say this in whether it's VicPol or AV or what other agencies we're representing, women get asked to do these things. I'm up here facilitating today and, you've got the majority of a panel. Sorry, Ben. But the change needs to happen at every, whether it's he, she, him, her, they, there. Everyone has a part to play in this and it's a contribution. So I'd ask you to remember that and we might address that at the end. I think, Sam, you were next in relation to...
Look, I think probably the best learning, and having dealt with a lot of people in emergency services, I know that this isn't necessarily the case, but at Lifesaving Victoria, and Emma Atkins has been a real champion of this, is if we believe in it and if we want there to be change, then we need to allocate a resource or resources to it. So we have a GM of inclusion and diversity, and we have a multicultural team. We have a diversity team, inclusion. We have groups that are focused on female leadership network or women in life-saving. I think all of us, if we put on our other day-to-day job hats, we get so caught up in the day-to-day business that we don't have time to really pay attention to the strategic stuff that needs changing. So if it needs changing, dedicating a resource is really important.
Thank you, and that's a really important point, so thank you for sharing. Ben, your thoughts on lessons learnt and, what we can offer to people in the room?
Yeah, absolutely. So from my perspective, trying to organise a camp like this, especially in a male-dominated organisation, you certainly hit your challenges. It's definitely not smooth sailing all the way through. We're organising a camp again this year, which is happening on the first weekend of April, which is incredibly exciting. But at the same time, it's so disappointing to hear a member turn around and say, oh, okay, well, how's the planning going for the discrimination camp?
Who hasn't heard a comment like that?
Yeah, and you just sort of sit there and, I'm a male and I sit there and go, really? Really, is that where we're at still? Is that really where we're at? So certainly, as much as change is happening in some places, it's just we need to speed it up somehow. And one of the ways that we're doing that, and I'll give Terry Wright a quick shout out here who's in the room, she's almost single-handedly carried diversity and inclusion.
Hand up, Terry.
There we go. So Terry's been almost single-handedly carrying diversity and inclusion over the last year and a half that I've had the pleasure of working with her. And Beth Taylor, who's in the room today, is part of a gender equity working group that I have the pleasure of sitting on. And it's the place we actually get to exchange ideas, exchange stories, and actually get inspiration from all the different corners of the state so that we can create these sort of events. There are certainly ideas that I've heard that Beth has come up with that I may have stolen or plagiarised, but then again, it's the best form of flattery, right? And hopefully she's probably done the same to a couple of mine. But that's the way we go about exchanging ideas, and there's certainly a big movement around firefighters around the globe and female firefighters on social media, and that ability to use social media to connect with different firefighters from different parts of the world has been absolutely outstanding. Ironically, the way I met FRV Deputy Commissioner Young was through a contact that I made in Norway or Sweden last year. What I was trying to achieve eventually made it back to Melbourne, and that's how we connected. So Firefighting and the movement to become a more gender diverse organisation and industry is happening across the globe, not just here. And we have to reach out and use resources everywhere and exchange the ideas, not just here, but across the globe to try and move that change.
Thanks, Ben. That's really helpful. So I think we might address a few of those issues at the end as well, if we've got time after questions and answers. The next question I'd like to turn to, and I'll probably go to you in relation to this, Sam, because I think, again, the program that you've brought to us today, but do you think there's a possibility of expanding the programs across different units, agencies and clubs, so not just within Lifesaving Victoria, or what that would look like for some of the other organisations here, and how we can include women from different backgrounds?
Absolutely. So I think expanding it across Lifesaving Victoria, that kind of got halted by COVID, but I know Dave's championing at the bit to keep that going. I see opportunities, whether it's called or for women, I see opportunities for all the agencies to collaborate. There's no reason why multiple agencies couldn't go to the same 450 stakeholders and approach the language schools or the cultural leaders to engage people in whatever programs they are. I think we can, I mean, in terms of opportunities for women, I think there's so much work that all of us can do, really save on resources by actually putting on programs. We've talked about this with our Ready to Lead program, and Ben and I were talking about it before. We have a Ready to Lead program, which when we can do it in person, we run from Port Melbourne. But we're missing people on the west of the state and the east of the state and probably up north. And we have had CFA and FRV people come along in our Ready to Lead program before. So this year what we're hoping to do is actually run it west, central and east and actually engage the other emergency services, so it gives volunteers of that area of the state the opportunity to learn from one another. And you know, I mean, we all might have slightly different technical skills, but women in leadership, they're all the same issues. You know, whether I'm assessing people on a young Ready to Lead program, whether it's leading women in water or, you know, leading women at high levels, generally the same leadership developmental needs come up. So it's not agency specific.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's probably, when we talk about that, there's a lot of opportunity perhaps for things like co-design, or where we actually all get in, and it can be at a community level or it can be at a strategic level across an organisation, where we actually say these are the same issues that we're looking at, these are the same challenges we're seeing, but there's opportunity, whether it's life-saving, it might be with Ambulance Victoria's auxiliary units, or you know, our fabulous CERT people. Shout out to the Kinglake people here. And you know, so is there an opportunity for us to collectively, as a part of emergency service, whether it's CFA or FRV or whoever it is, provide that opportunity? And
shameless plug, but also in the spirit of sharing, LSV's put this
lovely
amazing,
plug. Well done.
Yeah, amazing book. It's not like we're selling it. I've bought some extra copies. I know David would be happy to talk about it, but it really is a great structure in terms of not just this is the skill we want to teach you, but this is how we're going to retain you and encourage you and include you as part of the community. And I think I only first saw this sort of 10 days ago, and it's really simple to use, and you could insert women here, insert, you know, refugees here. Yeah.
Yep. So great plug, and I completely trust Sam's views on this, and if she's telling me it's fabulous, it will be fabulous. So thank you, Sam. And we've been working with Sam, and Lifesaving Victoria with AV has been offering part of a surge workforce, and you know, if there's a collective bid in this room that we can capture for about everyone getting in together, and particularly in relation to breaking the bias, I shout out to everyone. Now, I think there's some opportunity now for some questions and answers, so please, I encourage you to take the collective wisdom of those who are sitting up here before in relation to the challenges or the biases or how they navigated, you know, the components of introduction of these programs. So please, open for questions, anyone. Yes, up the back. Would you like to stand up and introduce yourself, and then the question, please?
Hi, I'm Chris Upman. I'm Chief Fire Officer, Forest Fire Management Victoria. Kelly, the Cutting Shit Up Day, which is what you didn't describe as the program that you were talking about today, just really would love to hear about why it's important for gender-specific training programs, why it makes a difference, and also why it's important to see female trainers. So just wouldn't mind your perspective on those two things.
Sure. I was actually going to tone it down and call it a Cut Stuff Up Day, but it actually was Cut Shit Up Day. And it was all born, first of all, there's a number of my Gippsland colleagues here who are an integral part of this working group.
Who are part of the Cutting Shit Up, apparently. Yep, hands up, go on, acknowledge yourselves, thank you, welcome.
Oh, there's more than that. They're an integral part of this working group. And the Cut Shit Up Day just started as a conversation from Erica Lind, who's here today, I think her district manager and a couple of others, and they were just talking about retaining our project firefighters. We lose so many of them after the first year. So just a simple sitting around having a cup of tea with the project firefighters and asking them, you know, what were some of their frustrations, what would they like to see happen, and a lot of the women spoke up and said that they would like to learn more or do more with their chainsaws. There's been no real fire season since they did their training back in November, and a lot of them weren't confident with their chainsaw use. So they just kept it really, really simple, kept the planning simple, made it easy. They just went out for a day and cut shit up. It was
Thank you for that question, Chris. I think it's been very helpful.
The alternative as well, and I know it's supposed to be, you know, diverse gender and those sorts of things, and that was all women, but they were the ones who weren't confident, and it created a really safe environment for them to be able to do that. No one was ever going to fail. It was just about learning and doing more with their skills.
I don't think that's me.
But I just want to flip it on the other side as well. They've also sat down at the district and spoken about other areas that they're concerned about, like safety. And a lot of our new project firefighters are quite young and haven't had a lot of time behind the wheel or back in a trailer and those sorts of things. So they actually had a day too that was both men and women, because some of the men were quite happy to put their hand up to say, yeah, we'd like to have a day of doing that. So it's just a little project. Like there's so much we can try and chew off, which we're all sitting here today wanting the same thing, but there's some little things we can do, and there's some really big things that are going to take a lot of time. But they're just little things on the ground, the operational things that are working.
And I think that's a really important point, so thanks for raising it, Chris. But I actually have a girlfriend who is an ambulance community officer, and one of her greatest worries when she signed up to be an ACO was whether the gentlemen, the men in the branch, would judge her for the way she reversed an ambulance because she wasn't confident with reversing. So I think that's probably akin to the cutting shit up stuff, but it's the stuff. So I probably challenge each of you in the audience to actually look, and I know Euripides Mercedes is here, and he is an inspector at a very sort of male-dominated area, so the emergency, it's critical, I've almost forgotten the VicPol terms, but the response team. So traditionally, I think male-dominated. I'm not sure what the breakup is, but I'm sure that Everett, coming from a family violence background and understanding gender bias and what exists, that you've challenged yourself to see of the things that are similar that you can make easier for women or allow them to navigate a space safely. So I think it's a really important point, so thanks for raising it, Chris. Other questions from people in the audience? Yes, would you like to stand up and introduce yourself? I can't see, there's a bit of a shadow.
Hi, Mary Armstrong from Ambulance Victoria. Sam, I was just wondering if there was any thoughts of having other groups, Lifesaving Victoria are going to put through the called, if there are any other groups that are interested in pursuing learning to swim or the program.
Any other groups?
Any other called groups? Any cultural and
Oh
regional
yeah,
diverse-
absolutely. We were just focusing on this particular group as part of today, but the programs are run all throughout the state.
Thanks, Sam. And I think there was another question from up the back.
Hi, I'm Sally Summers. I'm currently with Emergency Management Victoria here at the State Control Centre in the city, and my substantive position and work is with Parks Victoria. My question is about our use of language and how mindful or aware we could improve our use of language. I've been called out myself in in Parks Victoria about my use of the term "my boys," referring to a management team that I support. So I've used that term. I've heard it used today. I've heard women referred to as girls. I'm not saying I disagree. They are adults. You know, whether we use but or and, whether we talk about our colleagues, our women down on the ground, working on the ground level, or at the front line. I heard Kelly sort of go to say down but pull herself up and change that. So I wonder how our use of our language and really looking at how we can, I guess, maybe it's that sort of positive psychology, but really tweak our language so that it is more inclusive and we avoid that sort of inference of beneath or below or less equal.
Inclusivity, I think we'd call it. And I think that's a really good point, so thank you for raising it. And I'll probably open up to the panel. Kelly, it might start with you, saying you did check yourself on your language, but we all do it and that's okay. It's a learning curve, so
It is,
Kel.
and I think a lot of it's habit because we've just been used to talking this way for so long. So we can quite politely pull people up when you hear or you're hearing what you think's not quite right. But the best person to pull you up is you. Simple as that.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't particularly think anyone would be particularly critical if they notice that, because I think it's a course that we're all trying to steer. Ben, your views?
Look, the quickest way to get a reality check is to start a women's challenge camp by saying, "Okay, guys."
Yes.
And having, Carly's looking at me going, "Yeah, you did actually." And having 50 women laugh at you, and you suddenly go, "Oh, yep, no, that's something I definitely need to keep an eye on." So I think it's just habit that we fall into, and like all aspects of life, we have good habits and bad habits. And I think you're absolutely right. We do need to check our language, and we need to make sure that we are using the appropriate language. And we're having a discussion earlier around firemen versus firefighters and firewomen, and making sure that we are really cautious about how we're describing the workers to make sure we are actually developing inclusive language from the offset. Because if we keep referring to it by gender roles, so a fireman, then all we're doing is excluding women from looking at that as a possibility, especially younger kids.
And I think it is that inclusivity piece. I'll tell you a bit of a funny story, I digress. But so I'd arrived so I've been at Ambulance Victoria for 6 months, arrived there at the end of August, and had left VicPol, and then a number of people had come forward to ask to meet with me, and some very expert clinical people. I have level 3 first aid, so I'm clearly, an asset to AV. But I'd had this meeting with these really good clinical people, and obviously they did take me back to a bit when I was on the Div van at Broadmeadows back in the 80s. But the closing comment, listening, you're a good listener. I'm like, thank you. And then the representative of the group said, "Well, anyway, darling, really nice to meet you." So, okay to call up. I said, "Perhaps that should be either Libby or the Chief Operating Officer, nice to meet you." And he said, "Point taken." So I think it's okay to call stuff out, because I don't think people mean to be rude, but it's just the language. And I encourage everyone here to check themselves and check others with the language. So I just give that as a bit of an aside. So any other questions, please? We have a couple of minutes left. Yes, would you like to stand up and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Ali from the CFA. My question's for Ben. So about CFA's camp, you talk about it's about upskilling women to take on leadership positions. I was keen to know if there was anything happening in parallel to upskill men to be able to create inclusive roles or environments within the CFA, given they make up the other 91% of the leadership.
That's an excellent question.
No, it is. It's a fantastic one. It's definitely something that I'm working on in the background. One of the key challenges that we have is, yes, we invest all this time into trying to bring women along the ride and increase their knowledge, but there's not a lot being done to bring men along on the ride. And one of the biggest challenges we have, and I spoke to my group about earlier today, is that all we're doing is talking about what we can do to increase women's awareness, their leadership. But if we don't bring men along on the ride with us, then we're undoing all of our hard work. Because until that actually occurs, we don't have equity, we don't have the equality that we're seeking. So one thing that I am taking a look at, and it's very, very early stages, is looking to try and run a male-focused camp or getaway, whatever we choose to call it, and actually look a lot at men's health and how we talk and how we speak and creating more inclusive environments. Because one aspect of volunteerism, and Life Saving Victoria, SES for example, will hopefully nod their head in agreement, but we'll find out shortly, is that we're missing out. When we look at the stats, it's something along the lines of 23% of CFA members are female, of which about 17 or 16% are operational. There is a huge opportunity to go out and actually recruit more females, because volunteerism is slowly dying in some areas, and we need to find a way to engage with more of the community. So if we can go out, find a way to make our brigades more inclusive, and that starts with potentially looking at what camps can we do to bring men along on that ride, then that's absolutely something we need to look at. So it's certainly something that I've been taking a look at over the last 6 to 8 months, because I've identified that we're doing all of this work for one gender, but we're not bringing the other gender along on the ride, and that's definitely something that needs to be worked out. Because until we do that, men will just sit there, cross their arms and say, well, what are you doing for us? And sometimes it's a fair question.
It is, but I think that's an excellent answer. But again, it's probably something that gives food for thought to the rest of the unit. I'll come to you in 2 ticks, just in relation to, are you actually promoting opportunities that allow men to build and grow capability that supports women within their agencies and organisations? I'll go up the back. If you could just stand and introduce yourself, please.
Hello, I'm Chloe Jeffers. I work with the SES and proudly representing the small number of us in the room. We've got 33% females, and I'm pulling up my stats. 28.7% of them are leaders. And we're working really hard on it, and up in the northeast they've got 50% of their units are run by women. So there is a lot of change coming through the SES, but the thing that we're challenged is, because we're making a real taking a real chance and being quite loud about it, that we're getting those naysayers who are going, but why do we need to do Women in Rescue, which for the VICSES volunteers in the room, we're running a all-female training for road crash rescue and other services on the 19th of March, because women hold equipment differently and they're intimidated by men at training, and they don't want to ask for help because they still don't feel that they can do it, because there are those strong men that are there telling them, get back in your box, unfortunately.
Hold
in a lot
it
of
that
those
way,
places.
darling.
Exactly, yeah. Why do you need a day for yourselves? And I saw that question come up. Why do we need International Women's Day? So my question to you in the long-winded way is, how do you, in your roles, battle that adversity, and what do you say to those people when they challenge you and go, you don't need to do anything, we're already doing enough?
I might turn to Di on this one.
Brilliant. I thought you might. So I always look at it this way, that there's a continuum of accepting what needs to happen. So at this end, you might have your change agents and your first followers, and congratulations, SES, well done. Then the majority might be your pragmatists and your skeptics, and then you are going to have your traditionalists. So, you know, if it was okay back in the day and it was this way in 1970 and 1980, we're going to stick with that. So in that continuum, I tend to not spend any time down that end. Because do you know why? Well, why would you? Because it doesn't matter what you do, how you try and influence, what you try and come at, or what you don't. These people are set in their mindset. So that's about 10%. Up here might be about 10%, but your 80 is your pragmatists and your skeptics. And they tend to sit back and watch, and then they'll make a move, because they want to know, in which way do I move? Do I move down to the traditionalists, or do they move up to the change agents? And generally you'll find, just with time and evolution, they'll move to the right end of the continuum. So what my advice is, and what VicPol has tended to do, because we've gone through all that, is just ignore the naysayers. And it's like what Ben's saying. The men in your own industry will call it out eventually, and it will be called out, you know, loudly and proudly. And we all know that the conversation in a room, it changes. When you have women in a room, the conversation changes when you add men to the room. It's just a dynamic. It's not a good or a bad thing. It's just a thing. We have to accept it because women will negotiate differently. They'll lead differently. They'll talk differently. That's the beauty of diversity. And that's what's kept us in our lanes for so long, is that in organisations like VicPol, where they're really hierarchical and heavily stacked with male gender, there wasn't that allowability for leadership to look different or feel different. So all you need to do is say how it is. We need these days to build confidence in women, and we need these days because women like to learn differently, and we'll continue to do that. Thanks very much.
Excellent answer. I've got one final question over here, and then I'll do some closing comments. I'm getting the wind up. But
Thanks very much, Libby. I'm Fiona Hare from Victoria Police. And I had an interesting conversation with some people at lunchtime that drew attention to the fact that we're all in organisations that are not like every other organisation in Australia, in that we tend to be in command and control kind of environments. And the conversation I had was about calling out bias if you're a junior rank and the bias is coming from your superiors. It may be unconscious bias or conscious bias or language or, something serious down to something quite trivial. And just how people of sort of more junior or lower ranks can deal with calling it out. And we were discussing some of the challenges with that. And as a VPS member, I don't have this problem. I can challenge my sworn superiors in the organisation, and as VPS we get away with that. But sorry, Libby.
I said go you. But I think, and I don't know whether anyone else on the panel has an answer to that. Is there anyone who wanted to speak to that?
I think there's an avenue for it, and I've seen it done really delicately and deliberately, and I think they both sit really well together. And I particularly think it's the junior people represented in your organisations that need to call it out, because they're well versed in equity and inclusion and equality. They've come through different education systems, they've come through a different time, they've come through a different generation, and they are actually the makers of change. And if they do it with some dignity, not perhaps, you need to do it at the time, but you can do it to the side. I don't think any leader in an organisation needs to be named and shamed or called out publicly to the point where it's embarrassing, but you can get change by just having that quiet conversation to the side, where that person, no matter about their rank or where they are in the organisation, points it out for the betterment of the organisation that person's leading. And I've seen it done brilliantly with those words.
And I think, Fiona, my own view would be, again, and you're quite right in terms of hierarchical and command and control, but I think that the lesson for us as leaders, or the leaders in the room, is to actually ask people to step up at the end of a meeting and challenge you. And I don't mean that, but you also can quietly say, if there's anyone here who's not comfortable to talk about things out of this meeting, but please feel free to touch base with me after, because we can then deal with those issues as they arise. But I encourage you to allow your staff respectfully, and we all should be respectful, but to step up and challenge the status quo, because that's where we get change. So again, Suzanne's winding me up, so I'll just do a couple of closing points. So the really great takeaway from me here is that we are a collective good, and we are collectively have the opportunity for change, and we shouldn't silo ourselves as far as organisations go, but look at the opportunities more broadly across this. And one of the important things, it might have been Chris that you said this, but it's about actually asking. I think when we sit here as leaders, and I'm talking from my perspective, but we never ask the question, and we have a lot of assumptions, and we actually don't really know what it's like working on the ambulance or on the div van, or or being the lifesaver, because we just make all these assumptions, and unless we ask those questions, we're never going to get the true answers and understand how we can make an impact. So I encourage you all to do that. And then I just wanted to ask the audience if there's anyone who has any other takeaways that they have for today, or any enlightening pieces that they would like to share with the audience. No, well, hopefully there's some enlightenment, but that's great, Suzanne. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.